Greetings. Dracula's castle, Bram Stoker's castle, or Bran's castle? So spooky either way, isn't it? Or is it? I was just recently in Romania, traveling for pleasure, as one does, and Bran Castle was on my travel wish list for Romania because I've always heard it referred to as Dracula's castle. Then I started doing some Googling, some research, because that's what I do before traveling to a specific place. I can't just wait for a guide to tell me things about the place. And things were not adding up. The castle itself is heavily marketed outside of Romania as Dracula's castle. And you're gonna wonder why. So if you're not familiar with Bram Stoker's Dracula, let me give you a little bit of a refresher. So the novel Dracula was written by Bram Stoker in 1897, and it follows the journey of Jonathan Harker as he happens to be living for a little while in Transylvania at Count Dracula's castle. I won't go into the details, that's really a separate conversation, the entire novel, but you only need to know that this guy ends up living with this count that is actually a vampire and lives in Transylvania in a very big old castle. So why are the two connected? So the reasons that people believe that Dracula, Count Dracula's title character of the novel, is inspired by Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Dracula, and I hope I'm not butchering the name, was indeed a prince from the 15th century, a prince of Wallachia. While Bran Castle is located on the Transylvanian side of the historical border with Wallachia, meaning that Bran is 20 to 25 kilometers outside of Brazov. I did go there by train, which was actually lovely. It does take a little bit more planning than if you go with the planned tour guide, but you can see all of the nature. I actually spotted a deer on the train track, so I do highly recommend that if you're feeling adventurous. But Vlad the Impaler was known as the Impaler because the guy had a tendency to take heads of his enemies, dead enemies, and just stick them on poles outside his castle for everyone to see. You wouldn't try a guy that sticks heads on a pole, would you? So the bloodthirst of the prince, the bloodthirst of Dracula, the name being pretty much the same, you can see the connection there. And I do encourage you to just look at Vlad the Impaler's historical figure with a little bit more of a clean lens and just dive deep into it without being influenced by the nickname or the connection with Dracula. It might be interesting. But where does the connection between Dracula and Vlad and the castle come into place? So what happens is that there are some very thin connections between Vlad, the historical figure, and the castle, as it was believed that it was imprisoned by Hungarians in the castle. The links there have not really been proved. It is much more likely that it was actually imprisoned by the Hungarians in Budapest. Now, where does the misinformation start? Because the castle itself doesn't really match the description in the novel at all. So let me read you a little bit of the description from the novel while I show you me starting a little illustration for this video.
The castle is on the very edge of a terrible precipice. A stone falling from a window would fall for 1,000 feet without touching anything. As far as the eye can reach is a sea of green treetops, with occasionally a deep rift where there is a chasm. Suddenly, I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast, ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the moonlit sky. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that on three sides it was quite impregnable. You will notice that Bran's castle is located on a rocky hilltop. However, I would argue that most castles and fortresses are overlooking a valley or a specific area. That's kind of the point.
So as you can see, like the castle itself is lovely. It has a lovely cream shade, and then you have this lovely red tiles. And I also was incredibly lucky to be there on a lovely summer and sunny day, which really, really doesn't help if you're looking for spooky vibes.
Alright, so let's get into a spooky mood. The first ghost of Bram's castle is a mysterious monk. According to the legend, this monk was sealed alive within the castle walls as he broke his vows to, well, not have physical relations with anyone. So, as a punishment, he was just sealed in alive. So, it is said that his anguished spirit lingers in the castle, and especially in the long corridors of the castle itself or in the chapel of the castle. Visitors have reported hearing whispers echoing through rooms or footsteps coming from empty rooms and empty hallways. But is the monk alone? Not quite. While there is no connection between the monk and the White Lady of Bran Castle, and yes, of course, it is always White Lady. The White Lady of Bran's castle is said to be a noble woman who met a very tragic end within the castle itself. According to one legend, she was betrayed by her lover. In others, she was just falsely accused of treason. Either way, a ghost is said to drift to the castle, and she's dressed in a long, flowy, nightmarish white gown, and she's just sad, which, fair enough. I would be as well if I was a ghost, probably. So witnesses have reported seeing her just near the chapel or in the courtyard or just around the corner, just seeing a glimpse of a white lady just right behind you. And along with that, chilling drops in temperature.
Well, the castle itself was built in 1377 and by the Saxon. The inside of the castle, which really is a fortress, were curated by Queen Mary. Well, she comes much, much later in the story, but you can see some of the pieces that she put into the castle later, and there are some areas of the exhibition that are dedicated to her and her story, and they're lovely pieces that really, really drive home the point that the Romanian artistry is impressive. It does deserve its own space and its own acknowledgement outside of the whole fanfare about Dracula. But that doesn't solve the question, how did we end up here if the historical figure really doesn't match and the castle itself really doesn't match? How did we get here?
There is an area of the castle that's dedicated to like myth and legends and horror. And of course, when talking about cryptids or talking about werewolves, you end up talking about vampires as well. And when you talk about vampires, you do end up talking about Vlad the Impaler. So there is an area of the castle where you have things like a Dracula statue or videos playing. That I can see how you would be confused about the marketing of the castle when you go into it and see all of this, regardless of how much care the museum itself takes into representing it properly.
So what most likely happened is that in the 60s, when Romania was opening more and more, much like other Eastern European countries to the rest of the world and to the West, some Western tourists nicknamed the castle as so. What happened is that tourists did come into the area with an expectation of the link between Transylvania and Dracula, and the area around Bran was visited quite a bit, so it was a case of right castle, right time, wrong reference. Very quickly, you see guidebooks and brochures promoting Romania and Bran as Dracula's home. So these New York-based agencies start building a tour based on a very specific book that came out in 1972 by McNally and Floresky, and that would be In Search of Dracula. At one point, they even invited the head of the National Tourism Office to New York to talk about this tour, and although the guy was pretty confused because Romanians didn't really feel the link that strongly in their veins, the guy did go because, of course, Romania was trying to have more and more relationship with America and to have as many American tourists coming in and boosting the economy. So the guy goes and they end up with an 18-day tour pre-packaged called A Spotlight on Dracula, an Adventure in Transylvania. Romania does respond in a way to this tour that is launched in 1972 as well by General Tours, with a tour of their own, with a very, very different title, Dracula, Legend and Truth, with the tour that is really centered about the historical figure of Rad the Impaler and not mentioning vampires at all.
And here we go, this is the finished illustration. Have a cup of tea with me. Until the next one.